All right, so welcome. It's August something, and nothing has changed. Isn't that great? Uh, but in the spirit of nothing changing, and we're going to keep talking about the hindrances. Really having some fun. I've spent some time with a book called The Craving Mind, which I can highly recommend, by Judson Brewer. Um, and and this is a very practical, and he's a psychiatrist, researcher, and a serious Buddhist practitioner. So I appreciate that he goes in both ways and brings them together. He talks about dependent origination, and then like uh, behaviorism, like the Skinner, uh, B.F. Skinner, and so it's interesting. He brings that all together, um, and has some good things to say. And I think some things that uh, I think as many different ways as we can hear these teachings is good, because it gives us different ways of getting in and connecting. So I may talk a little bit from that, or read a little bit from that tonight. But I don't know, I guess we could start meditating. Since I did my rambling beforehand, we don't have to spend so much time on that. I see the numbers are accumulating. Yeah. Um, it's just such an interesting time. You just keep getting these strange perspectives. You stop and kind of think about your life and how different it is right now. And then you just kind of carry on. I mean, it's like grieving, really. It's like grieving in that way in which you can, it's not as bad as grieving most of the time, but in that way that you can forget that the world is turned upside down. And then you step outside in here in Berkeley, you step outside and it smells like smoke, and there's ash, literally ash coming down from the sky. You're seeing it, and the mask is no longer like, oh, I'll put on my mask when I go in the store. The mask you put on when you step outside. And so there's that kind of heartbreak. I think Joe Biden spoke to that last night too. I don't want to get into specific politics, because it's definitely, I will talk about issues, but not about candidates. I just thought that some of the things he said, kind of resonated with that. Anyway, a little time to meditate. So just to get comfortable on your seating device, whatever you might be sitting on. And as usual, just to check in with your posture. I mean, meditation is a ritual, but it's not a magical ritual. But it is really helpful to ritualize the beginning of your meditation period in certain ways, so that you kind of get on track right away. So you're not just sort of like, oh, I guess I'm meditating. And I think establishing the body posture as something a little different from your ordinary way of hanging out, on the couch, it is one of the ways that we ritualize that, and that we then, our mind then knows. We trigger the body posture, actually triggers a mind state and an understanding. The mind just knows, oh, this is meditation time. And so you can gently close your eyes, or just lower your gaze if you're more comfortable letting in some light. And letting the attention move through the body, sensing areas of tension, relaxing and softening those areas. Noticing areas of energy and strong sensation, as well as areas where it's quieter, there's less going on. One of the striking things about becoming aware of the sensations in the body is seeing how many different sensations there are at any given moment. Typically, if someone asks how we're feeling, it'll be a strong sensation that we mention. Like, oh, I have a headache, or my back hurts, or something positive, maybe, I'm feeling really light, energized. But any one of those descriptions is usually leaving out a lot of other things that are going on. And just with meditation, we have this sense of not giving priority to one thing, but rather having this openness, exploring what's the fullness of our experience. So there's two things going on here. That one is just the observing what's happening, but the other is being intentional with the body and seeing if we can intentionally soften or relax the body. This is typical of the balance we work with in meditation, the balance between effort and acceptance. Beyond just the sensations in the body, it's helpful to open to any sounds in your environment. It's easy to have of unconscious resistance to sound when we're trying to meditate, or even a conscious one, where we're wanting things to be quiet, and where we have no control over that. It's most useful if we can have an openness and acceptance, even a investigation, a mindfulness of the sounds, and even mindfulness of the irritation. And then we can also observe, as part of this ritual opening of a meditation period, just what mood is present for us. What are we feeling? It's actually an interesting question. Is there always a mood present? As many times it might be very subtle, but my sense is that there is always some mood. We might not notice it, might not really be affecting us, but maybe not. To investigate for yourself. No doubt, though, becoming aware of mood, of shifts in mood, rising and falling, and bringing mindfulness to that really allows for a much more balanced mind states and attitudes and even behavior. When if we're unconscious of moods, then they tend to just trigger behavior. When we can notice them there, then we can be more intentional, whether we are going to speak out of that energy or act out of that energy or just hold the energy. Moods are really important also because they're so integral to our thinking. They have such an influence on how we think, and how we even view and experience the world. In a positive mood, we tend to see things and experience things in a more positive way, and vice versa with a difficult or unpleasant mood. We tend to see things in negative terms. This is all part of bringing awareness so that we become less conditioned, less controlled by unseen aspects of ourselves. It also is fundamentally about letting go of self, of clinging to self-view. We don't see things so much as I am feeling this, as this is being felt. A very different way that those attitudes determine how we respond to those feelings, whether we think that it's happening to me or whether it's just happening. So once we move through this kind of scanning or main areas of experience of body, of sound, of mood, then it's time to come to the breath so that we have a very specific and neutral sense object to pay attention to in our meditation. And this doesn't mean that we are now closing ourselves off from other experiences, but it does give us a tool for calming, for focusing, and a place to return when we are letting go, when we get swept away by thoughts or feelings. We have this neutral experience to return to. It just helps us step out of those kind of triggered mental states. So we can see the breath in two ways. One is, this is what I'm trying to focus on. So it's the concentration object. But it's also this refuge, this is what I'm going to come back to, going to come home to the breath. And then we're not so much trying to concentrate on the breath, but we're using it. We're letting it help us, letting us help, or helping us to let go. But it's important not to turn that into a conflict, sort of demonizing thoughts or feelings or things that distract us, and preferring the breath, and then thinking there's something wrong with us or with our meditation when we're not with the breath, or thinking that we're doing it really well if we stay with the breath. All of that misses the point, turns it into another sort of striving, ambitious activity, trying to accomplish something. As much as possible, we try to step out of that kind of orientation towards experience, that kind of grade school, trying to get a good grade from the teacher attitude, or the employee on the rise trying to get a good evaluation from the boss. Oh, I was on my breath a lot, boss. I'm so good. All of that has nothing to do with this practice, which is what makes it difficult, because we're so conditioned to think in terms of success and failure, right and wrong. So we have to find this other way of being. It's the opposite of accumulating. It's letting go. Renunciation, as the Buddha calls it. In working with the hindrances, as we've been talking about these last couple classes, we can start to identify the nature of our thoughts and just simply categorize them in one of two ways. Are they thoughts of desire or thoughts of aversion? And each of these can take on very different tones and intensities. It can be a simple desire for the bell to ring, or it can be something much stronger, like dying for a drink or a cigarette. And the aversion can be quite simple. It can be just feeling a slight discomfort in some part of the body that you want to change, fix. Or it might be much more serious, or anger that's bubbling up. And I think if we look closely, that most of our thoughts have the tone of one or the other of these. And this is, again, a way of disidentifying, not taking personally what's happening in our mind. We just start to see that the habit of mind is to either want to get or to get rid of something. It's that restlessness of the human mind. It's not a bad thing, but it is what the Buddha pointed to as the cause of suffering. So in that regard, it's very helpful to see and to consider at least letting go. Hmm. That was a lot of talking tonight, but um, I take these classes as kind of an opportunity to teach Dharma and recovery, but to try to communicate a lot in a guided meditation that I'm hoping that you will take on and sort of absorb to use in your regular practice. So sometimes I'm giving maybe more information than is helpful in the moment, but I'm hoping that it's something that you can kind of use. This last idea that I was talking about is something that really was helpful in my early practice. And I did it, and I guess I don't use it so much these days, but um, the practice of noting, which comes out of the Burmese tradition, the Mahasi Sayadaw, who was a great Burmese master, 20th century Buddhist master. The noting practice, it's somewhat mechanical, where you start by just noting in and out with your breath, but then you start to make mental notes of whatever kind of distracts you. So as soon as you realize, oh, you're thinking, you make a mental note, thinking, just to kind of, and again, it's kind of a way of disidentifying. So you're just like observing that thinking is happening, rather than I am having a thought. But this further precision to notice when there's desire or aversion, which my sense and my experience of doing this is that most thoughts, maybe all thoughts practically, fall into one or the other. I mean, there are obviously thoughts of loving kindness and thoughts of generosity and compassion, but a lot of the stuff that's just kind of being generated in there tends to fall into one of these, either one or the other. And I think it's seeing that it's humbling, because we like to think of our thoughts as being these things. You're human beings. We're the crown of creation. We're somehow this advanced life form, and yet we see that on some level it's very, very primal. It's just I like it, I'm afraid of it. I want it, I want to get away from it. It's like we're just this binary kind of thing. That's humbling, but again, it's also like once you see that, it's much easier to not take it personally. Because if it was about me, it would have more subtlety to it than that. It would be more complex than that. But it's not. At its base, it's really just very simple. So a few things. I think I'm just going to hop around a little bit tonight. There's a few little pieces I'd like to go into that are kind of all related, but I'm not sure it's going to be a seamless movement from one topic to another. But first, I'll start with a little piece from this book, The Craving Mind. Maybe I'll start out by a little egotism. Here I am talking about not self. That I had this book came out in 2017, and I got it right away. I think probably Walt told me about it because Walt tends to be on top of these things. Walt Opie, who I hope you guys know, and I had been reading it, and then I went to teach somewhere on the East Coast, the Omega Institute, and this guy Judson Brewer was teaching there at the same time, and I saw his name on the catalog, and I thought, oh, maybe I'll meet this guy. I wrote this book, and so I see him in the dining hall. So I go over and say, "Hi, I'm Kevin Griffin. I've just been reading your book." He jumps up. He goes, "Oh, I've got your book right on my shelf." I was like, "Oh, really? Oh, okay, good. So I'm cool too." Anyway, it was a sweet moment. Always nice to think that I'm part of the conversation, because these are like the smart people. He went to Yale, and, he's got a PhD and all that. I'm just an alcoholic, ex-guitar player. All right. This is from the introduction, which, so many times these kind of books, you get a lot of the juice from the introduction. It gets a lot more dense later. There's a lot of good stuff, but you get a lot of the basic ideas here. And this is called Getting Hooked. When we get hooked on the latest video game on our phone or our favorite flavor of Ben & Jerry's ice cream, we are tapping into one of the most evolutionarily conserved learning processes currently known to science, one shared among countless species and dating back to the most basic nervous systems known to man. This reward-based learning basically goes like this. We see some food that looks good. Our brain says, calories, survival, and we eat the food. We taste it. It tastes good. And especially when we eat sugar, our bodies send a signal to our brains. Remember what you're eating and where you found it. We lay down this memory based on experience and location. And we learn to repeat the process the next time. See food, eat food, feel good, repeat. And then he has in italicized, trigger, behavior, reward. So this is then becomes a repeated theme. This is obviously something that these researchers have seen as like this pattern: trigger, behavior, reward. So after a while, our creative brains tell us, hey, you can use this for more than remembering where food is. The next time you feel bad, why don't you try eating something good so that you will feel better? We thank our brains for that great idea, try it, and quickly learn that if we eat ice cream or chocolate when we are mad or sad, we do feel better. It is the same learning process, just a different trigger. Instead of a hunger signal coming from our stomach, this emotional signal, feeling sad, triggers the urge to eat. Or maybe in our teenage years, we saw the rebel kids smoking outside school and looking cool, and we thought, hey, I want to be like them, and we started smoking. See cool, smoke to be cool, feel good. Repeat, trigger, behavior, reward. And each time we perform the behavior, we reinforce this brain pathway, which says, great, do it again. It's called karma, actually. So we do, and it becomes a habit loop. Later, feeling stressed out triggers that urge to eat something sweet or to smoke. Now, with the same brain mechanisms, we have gone from learning to survive to literally killing ourselves with these habits. Obesity and smoking are among the leading preventable causes of morbidity and mortality in the world. How did we get into this mess? And so the story goes on. But certainly for addicts of any kind, he's kind of, working not directly with alcoholism, although he does talk about working with drug addicts later. But we can see it's the same thing, right? This reward process. We have to bring mindfulness to this process to break it. Another piece he draws from, and this is something that's familiar to me from mindfulness-based relapse prevention. And it was especially with cigarette smokers. And Alan Marlatt, who was one of the great addiction researchers, passed away a while ago, but he was one of the founders with me of the Buddhist Recovery Network, putting his name in the chat. He's worth looking at his work. It's pretty technical and very research oriented, but he worked with developing this mindfulness-based relapse prevention. And there's a workbook that was published some years ago. And again, they don't tend to work really so much with alcoholics. It's not what they focus on. But they talk a lot about the process with smoking cigarettes, which, and Judd Brewer talks about this too, is one of the hardest addictions to stop. And what they found was, it's very simple what they found, and it's very, again, related to Buddhism, that if people started to realize essentially that their craving was impermanent, that they could stop. so it, first of all, they had to be mindful of the craving, right? So this is like the first part of any kind of mindfulness program and any kind of, Buddhist-based recovery program, to see the craving as it arises. And this is the first hindrance, just to remind you that we're talking about the hindrances. And what they found is that, he gives this example, Judd Brewer gives this example of saying to this smoker, well, were you ever in a situation where you couldn't smoke, like on a plane or in a restaurant or somewhere, or at work where you couldn't smoke? And the guy says, yeah. And he said, well, what happened to that craving? Because the guy comes into his office saying, my head's going to explode if I don't smoke a cigarette, which, I used to have that feeling if I don't have a drink. Or if I don't smoke some dope, my head's gonna explode. And the guy says, well, in those situations, I guess what would happen is it would kind of pass, and then I would forget about it, And he's like, yeah, right. So it's like the next basic Buddhist principle: everything is impermanent. And so then the next thing they teach them is this thing called urge surfing, which is, can you just be with the experience, breathe with it, and kind of surf it like it's a big energetic wave, a wave of craving, and without reacting to it, without trying to push it away, without acting on it, and just feel it as an energetic experience, and notice that it passes. And of course, and this has been very successful. Judd shows these, statistics on the studies that they do, comparing it to the American Lung Association's program. It was like something like 5 times more effective. And of course, then the final Buddhist element of this, I mentioned before, karma. Karma in the strict sense of cause and effect, and that what we know, the way karma works, is the more you do something, the more you have the tendency to do it. The less you do it, the less you have the tendency to do it. So every time we act on a craving, we reinforce, just as he said, we're reinforcing that. Oh, when I feel this way, then I do this. And it just becomes this automatic thing, right? I want a drink, I have a drink. I want a cigarette, I have a cigarette. So when we want to drink and we don't drink, then that over time reduces the craving to drink, reduces the craving to smoke, reduces the craving to eat the unhealthy food. So this is interesting, and as I said, Judson Brewer is he's a serious Buddhist practitioner, and so there's some of these mindfulness researchers who, it seems to me, I'm somewhat questioning their sort of Buddhist bona fides. Is that the right word? Bona fides, right? Their real credibility as Buddhist practitioners, but he's quoting suttas, and he's obviously really studied, and so I appreciate that he's really making these direct correlations with Buddhism, and sort of saying, essentially, which is what Vimalasara says, that Buddhism is sort of the original recovery program. It's saying all the same stuff that the modern addiction researchers are showing, which is why bottom line, I don't really study the research that much, because when I read about it, I go, well, it's the same thing I'm doing. Why do I have to? It's good for some people, and it helps. Certain people really like to hear it through this scientific lens, but I'm just too old to adopt new things like that. Buddhism's good enough for me. So let's see, what other little pieces? A couple other pieces I wanted to get into. Well, I'll pull out this guy to go deep. This is Venerable Analayo, his book Satipatthana. And Analayo is a Buddhist monk. I'll put his name in here. And scholar. And He's not easy to read. If you haven't been at least on a few uh, intensive meditation retreats, you're going to really have trouble wading through this work. But it's got some gems in it. I mean, it's the whole thing is a gem, but it's got some gems that do kind of stand out that are clear enough. Um, uh, and so this is a chapter. So Satipatthana is the four foundations of mindfulness. It's the most important sutta in Theravada Buddhism, and that this book is just a analysis of the sutta. And so it's like a 300-page book that's analyzing like a 10-page sutta. So that's the kind of level of detail that it gets into. But this is a section on the hindrances. And this, here's a point that he makes about the relationship between mindfulness and working with the hindrances. He says, it needs to be kept in mind that the emphasis in the Satipatthana Sutta is not on actively opposing a hindrance, but on clearly recognizing a hindrance together with the conditions related to its presence or absence. More active measures are the domain of right effort, another factor of the Noble Eightfold Path. So, and this is a really important point, and this is what we emphasize so much in teaching mindfulness meditation, that to learn to just be with and observe the experience without trying to fix it. I remember early in my practice, my first few retreats, two of my first really big retreats were with Jack Kornfield and Joseph Goldstein, among other teachers, but they were the ones that I was really most interested in, was drawn to. And I would get to have individual meetings with them. In those days, they weren't the superstars that they are today, so it was a little easier to have contact with them. And I remember so well in those early days of practice when I didn't quite understand what mindfulness was, and that I would go into an interview with what seemed to me a problem that I assumed they could tell me how to fix. And I would describe the challenge I was having. And virtually no matter what, they would just say, well, just try to be present with that. Just try to be aware of that. Can you just observe that? And in those days, I always felt like they were holding something back. It was like, well, you're just a beginner. We're not going to give you the real thing. We're going to just let you, give you this. And it was so frustrating, because there's always, there is naturally this tendency when you think you're learning a skill, and these are the pros, and tell me how to do it, And instead, it seemed like instead of telling me how to do it, they were telling me to just look at it. Well, of course, it turns out that's how you do it. But it's not immediately obvious. And I think I was referring to this in the guided meditation tonight. We have this tendency to want to control things and to make something happen, and then to judge things, right? And that's what I was talking about our way of, when we're learning a skill, it's like, am I doing it right? Am I doing it wrong? And we can apply this to most skills that we learn. But with mindfulness, well, you could say there's a right and wrong, but it's not, a technique exactly. It's kind of mysterious. It's this other way. I mean, particularly what's not about right or wrong is there's no value in putting a grade on your work. Like, I did really well, like I get a B+, that was an A-. That completely detracts from and distracts from the actual process and undermines it by engaging more craving and more aversion. Here you are trying to be mindful, and you notice, oh, wow, look at all that aversion. And what's the response in the mind? what's wrong with me that I have all this aversion, right? And that's the judging, that's the grading. Oh, I'm doing it wrong. I'm not good at this because I have all this desire. I have all this aversion. I should go to the teacher and ask him how to get rid of it. And then you go in, the teacher says, just like keep watching it, keep being with it. Oh, come on. Can't you give me something I can sink my teeth into? Some tofu, sure. So this is what Analayo is referring to. It needs to be kept in mind that the emphasis in the Satipatthana is not on actively opposing a hindrance, but on clearly recognizing a hindrance, together with the conditions related to its presence or absence. That's a really key thing, right? So what he's talking about is, how did this come about? You know, what are the causes and conditions for that? It's one of the reasons, oh, I misspelled venerable. I'm sorry about that. Looking at the chat, it's all I need. It's one of the reasons that I, see, that's as soon as I looked at, that I suggest in the guided meditation that you should notice what your mood is when you're starting to meditate. Because that's the condition, the existing condition, which is going to influence what arises in your mind as you're meditating. And if you don't see that, then all you're seeing is the stuff that's coming up, and you're just like clicking it off. Oh, there's a thought, there's a wish, there's a want, there's a plan, there's a resentment, chocolate, and you can, the noting practice can become something frustrating because you're not seeing what's triggering it all. You're only seeing the end result. And, it's great if you can be mindful and watch that end result and not react to it. But if you want to get at the root cause, it's to check in, what's the feeling going on? Oh, like, wow, I sat down today, but I'm really anxious because of what happened at work, and then my thoughts are just spinning out, and I'm trying to be mindful of the thoughts, but not seeing that, like, no, what I should need to be mindful of is the feeling, the anxiety. This is something Jack Kornfield, I really got it from him in his book, A Path with Heart. That was where it finally really clicked for me. And that was over a long period of time, because both Jack and Joseph, the other thing that they both told me early in my practice is, I think this was when I, got maybe a little bit more experience, that you pay attention to how you're feeling. Jack said to me, your practice is to feel. And that was another confusing instruction. I didn't know what that meant, and it took me some time to know why he was saying that to me. But what I see now is that what he was saying is, you're not paying attention to the right thing, and I don't like to put it so much in right or wrong terms, but the point is that one of the principles of mindfulness is that we want to pay attention to the strongest object, or the strongest underlying object of an experience. And that's where this does become a little tricky, because at times we actually need to kind of scan what's going on right now. Like, sometimes you'll be sitting and trying to meditate, and there's noise in the other room, and you don't realize that you're annoyed about it because you're trying to ignore it, right? And many times I've been sitting, like, especially on retreat, where my body starts to hurt, and I don't realize until I sort of suddenly wake up, oh, there's a part of my body that hurts right now, and I'm trying to ignore it. And I need to actually open to it and relax around it and allow it to be. And this is one of those elements of mindfulness that's so important is that acceptance element. And this is in RAIN, which recognize, accept, investigate, not identify, to the practice that Tara Brach loves and teaches, and but has been around for a while. But this, to kind of catch that underlying thing, again, where Analayo says, clearly recognizing hindrance together with the conditions related to its presence or absence. So what's triggering this? Now we have to be careful here, right? Because as soon as we say, oh, what's causing this, it can turn into a therapy session. Oh, it's because of my mother, or whatever, that if we're trying to get into, first causes. But the more relevant point is what in this moment is going on. That's kind of the central agitating factor in our experience. And so this is, again, how we kind of move from, I'm paying attention to my breath, and then there's the mind is wandering, and then I come back to the breath, and then get distracted to come back to the breath. And then we might, if you start to notice, like, wow, there's no real comfort, I'm not really settling with the breath at all, then we can kind of step back and scan a little bit. Like, oh, is there some feeling? Is there some irritation? Is there some noise? Yeah, I know that Tara, somebody just wrote to me about that, how Tara changed non-identified to nurture, but that's another discussion for another time. This idea of being able to kind of step back and scan carefully without getting lost in it, but just like, oh, what's going on right now? And it might simply be, oh, you know what? I'm kind of falling asleep, or, oh, I'm really restless. My body really doesn't want to be still right now. And mindfulness says, okay, can you pay attention to that restlessness? Can you pay attention to that sleepiness? Rather than, how can I get rid of it? How can I fix it? Yeah, one other thing I'll talk about, which is, I think, can be helpful in, again, it's kind of a disidentifying. And this comes out of the Visuddhimagga, which I want to correct. The other day, I mistranslated the Visuddhimagga. Must not have been on the ball. The Visuddhimagga means the path of purification. And I said the other day, the path of perfection. And I think that was because I was thinking about the 10 perfections. That's my excuse. But anyway, Visuddhimagga, the commentaries that I've spent some time talking about the other day, there's this funny little teaching in there that suggests that there are 3 personality types, which are the greed type, the aversive type, and the deluded type. And so the greed type tends to have more desire, right? They're kind of always like looking for the next form of stimulation, the next, exciting trip. They're restless in that way, kind of looking for things. The aversive type tends to be more critical and sort of more interested in avoiding discomfort than necessarily seeking out some exciting new experience. So as an aversive type, I know, like, I really like routine. And like, once I've gone to a restaurant and I liked it, let's just go there. No, I don't need to check out the new restaurant. That's okay. So that kind of more routine kind of way of approaching life. So the greed type, the aversive type, and the deluded type is kind of interesting. I mean, different ways to think about this, but the deluded type tends not to really know what's going on. Like they're kind of confused a lot, don't quite understand things. Yeah, and interestingly, all three types have a positive side and a negative side. So it's not like, oh, that's bad. The deluded type actually tends to be more equanimous. They tend to be less reactive to things because they're not always getting triggered to want something or to get rid of something. They're more like, oh, it's okay. This is fine. I don't know what's happening, but it's good. Seems okay to me. Um, so I bring that up just in the context of the hindrances to see that we're each going to probably have a tendency to get caught in certain, we'll if you start watching the way the hindrances show up for you, um, you're going to probably find that there are certain patterns, certain tendencies. And it's really helpful to realize that about yourself so that you don't take it so seriously. I mean, it's very clear to me that I have an aversive personality. And so when I'm kind of just being habitually negative, I can kind of sometimes, on occasion, realize, oh, I'm just being negative. Maybe I should look at this, be open to another view on this. And this could be the same with a greed mind. It's like, oh, I think I've got to do something special and different. Like, maybe I don't have to. That's okay. And the deluded type, I'm not sure what they do. But it should also be said that we all have all three types, right? All three elements in our personality. It's just that one or the other tends to predominate typically. And it's, again, I think, a helpful tool for looking at just letting go of believing what's showing up in our mind. So I had a little bit of caffeine today, which I don't usually do because I didn't sleep last night. So I don't know. I'm not talking any more than usual, but I can go on and on. And I have gone on and on to the point that I have not really left any time for people's questions. But I will open it for a moment. We can run over, because after all, nobody's going to kick us out of the hall. And anybody who wants to leave can leave without causing a disruption, although I'll be counting the numbers as people leave and taking personal offense if a lot of people run away. No, does anybody have like a burning question, something that really got set off from this conversation? It's great. You don't have to. In that case, let's do, oh, Angela must have showed up. She's putting in all the information in the, all the good information about Venmo and PayPal, all those things. Again, I'll say I have been appreciating that people have been supporting me in this teaching, and it really does help, given that I'm not doing any other teaching, and it's usually a significant part of my income. So it's really great. It's super sweet to just see, oh, look, I got somebody gave me a little money. Thank you, Angela, for putting in the retreat at Southern Dharma, which starts on September 2nd. And then we've got the other one, which we call the Vajrapani retreat. So the Southern Dharma will be on an East Coast schedule. So it'll be starting very early in the morning and then ending by 6 in the evening on the West Coast. The Vajrapani retreat will run on a West Coast time frame, which will mean starting it. I guess we'll have an early morning sit before breakfast. I don't know who's I'm not gonna get up for it. Somebody can get up for it. But, and those retreats, they're basically gonna be 3 sessions a day, like an hour and a half in each session. And then we'll talk about how, if people wanna make it a continuous all-day retreat, how to do that, which would be great. But also, if that's not going to work, you can make it into more an integrated retreat where you're doing some intensive practice, 3 sitting periods each day and a couple of Dharma talks. And then there'll be a meeting each night, like we do at the live retreats. And then trying to just bring more balance and mindfulness into your daily life, and kind of using that as a jumping off point. Either way will be, I think, really valuable. And, I'm going to be supported by, it's not going to be me alone. There's going to be multiple teachers, because it didn't seem practical for me to just sit in front of Zoom all day. So, great. Let's just do a little metta, even though it's after 8 o'clock. Just to settle back for a moment, back into your body, and just closing your eyes. I think we each need to, and we do, I'm sure you do, take time each day to just remember the suffering that's going on in the world, and that we're impacted by it as well, of course. And so to bring compassion to ourselves, and bringing compassion to the world. And really, I think for ourselves, so easy to feel adrift. And to kind of remember that that's appropriate, it's not easy, but if we're in recovery and we're practicing mindfulness and practicing loving kindness, we have the tools to hold these experiences. And it's impermanent. We know that. Impermanence sometimes takes longer. Some impermanence is longer than others, but will pass. And I hope we are learning still and growing still and using this time in positive ways as well. So just for a moment, appreciating your own effort, showing up. I so appreciate the people that come and sit with me and just want to hear Dharma, to know that you're taking care of yourselves in that way. It's very, very, uplifting. Just thinking, that, I guess just wishing that all beings can have this kind of self-care, and that we can all, that everyone can find a way to get through these times. And then finally, just recognizing that there are some who have lost everything, lost their beloveds, and to hold them in our hearts with great compassion. So may all beings be safe. May all beings be peaceful. May all beings stay awake to love and compassion in their hearts. All right, thank you. We'll meet again on Tuesday morning. I don't know, we might get through. Maybe we'll be done with the hindrances. I don't know. We'll see. Everybody be safe.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thanks.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks, Kevin. Good night.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thank
you, Kevin.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Paul.
All right, I am ending the meeting for all.